And we're back, with another reboot of a past video with some updates that never really made it out of the gate the first time around. But it is part of the bigger picture when it comes to the utter lack of humanity in some cases in show business. For some of these instances seem to be some kind of bad karma, many are due to human error or negligence, some are just downright questionable coincidences that suggest something nefarious was going on. The lengths some of the powers that be will go for the sake of entertainment, and not always for just our entertainment. Sometimes a film is just a front, and money is made from the footage and products behind the scenes. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and it's the bigger picture that reveals the common denominators of truth. Michael Jackson, one of the most recognizable figures on the planet, had even tried to tell you, they don't really care about us. Most of those we see as famous celebrities and influencers are nothing more than just pawns in this game of life. The mass majority of humans are NPCs, who aren't even capable of inner dialogue or critical thought. So who moves the pieces? Number 10. Alien, released in 1979. A sci-fi horror film following a space crew who faces, you guessed it, the alien, that's broken into their ship and begins terrorizing the crew. Director Ridley Scott used his young sons in child-sized spacesuits to increase the scale of the space jockey set and prop. The suits were poorly ventilated, and the children would overheat and pass out, needing to be revived with oxygen. The 26-foot-tall space jockey prop was later set aflame, where it had been put on display during the premiere. Some say it was an accident caused by a discarded lit cigarette, others say it was by arsonist rabbis who believed it was the work of the devil. Either way, it was a major fire hazard to the attendees, but luckily no one was hurt. Number 9. The Shining, released in 1980. A psychological horror directed by Stanley Kubrick, with the screenplay co-written by he and Diane Johnson, based on Stephen King's novel of the same name. The main character, Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, is an aspiring writer and recovering alcoholic, who takes on a winter caretaker position at the beautifully historic, yet isolated, Overlook Hotel. He brings along his wife Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, and son Danny, played by Danny Lloyd. When the winter storms roll in, it leaves the family stranded and further isolated within the hotel. Jack's sanity deteriorates as his inner demons manifest and are further ignited by haunting paranormal forces that inhabit the hotel, causing him to further struggle with his recovery from alcoholism and his guilt for his past mistakes. Kubrick believed it was better to make The Shining more of a standard horror film instead of the complicated psychological thriller it was meant to be. He ended up changing major plot points, slayed a key character that was intended to be used in the sequel, and even changed the entire ending. Nearing the end of filming, a fire broke out and destroyed several sets. The cause of fire remains unknown, but coincides with the original ending from the book, where the boiler explodes and the Overlook Hotel is burned to the ground. During filming, Kubrick berated and tormented his actors, especially Shelley Duvall, who played Wendy. The script changed so often, Nicholson stopped reading each new draft and began improvising, and Kubrick and Duvall were in heated arguments frequently. Kubrick intentionally isolated Shelley, and she was forced to perform the intense and exhausting baseball bat scene 127 times. Shortly after, she presented clumps of her hair to Kubrick that had begun falling out due to the extreme stress he was causing her. While some critics and audiences were in awe of her performance, many made her the object of ridicule, a meme in a time before memes. She was even nominated for Worst Actress for the Golden Raspberry Awards. Stephen King and his fans were especially critical of the film and the deviations from major details in the book. Although she did find some success in acting following The Shining, going on to work with the late Robin Williams in Popeye as Olive Oyl, she completely disappeared from the public eye after her retirement in 2002. She later resurfaced on Dr. Phil in 2016, after agreeing to an interview. She tells Phil and the audience that she's suffering from a mental illness and needs help. Phil and his production team received heavy criticism and were accused of exploiting poor Shelley in her vulnerable condition. Kubrick's daughter Vivian spoke out against the segment, posting an open letter to Dr. Phil on Twitter, saying it was lurid and exploitative entertainment and appallingly cruel. Mia Farrow joined her, stating that it was upsetting and unethical to exploit Shelley Duvall at this vulnerable time in her life. It would be 33 years before King finally wrote a sequel to The Shining, and another handful of years before it was made into the film Dr. Sleep, released in 2019. Picking up from where the story left off, but now focused on Jack's son Danny decades later. Number 8. The Birds, released in 1963, was a natural horror thriller inspired by the true event of a mass bird attack on the citizens of Capitola, California on August 18, 1961. Director Alfred Hitchcock was obsessed with the film's lead, Tippi Hedren. The Birds was her theatrical debut, and Hitchcock had likely chosen her because he was immediately enamored with her, not because she was the best for the part. At one point, he tried to forcefully grab and kiss her in the back of a car as they drove to the set. When his advances were rejected, he forced her to go through a torturous amount of filming with live birds, as well as glitchy mechanical ones, only giving her 1 day off a week. A mechanical bird broke what was supposed to be shatterproof glass of a telephone booth during filming, scratching Tippi's face and arms with the shards. Later, while trapped in an attic with live birds, he forces her to repeat the scene over and over until he believed her reaction to be authentic. By Friday, they had me down on the floor with the birds tied loosely to me with elastic bands, which were attached to the peck holes in my dress. Well, one of the birds clawed my eye, and that did it. I just sat and cried. She was ordered by a doctor to take a week of rest, but Hitchcock protested, saying there were no other scenes left to film but hers. The doctor replied, "Are you trying to kill her?" Hitchcock had also reportedly had 2 crew members stalk Tippi when she left the set, and report back where she went, who she visited, and how she spent her free time. He also advised the cast and crew to not speak to her. Tippi's co-star, Rod Taylor, recalls, Hitch was becoming very domineering and covetous of Tippi, and it was very difficult for her. No one was permitted to come physically close to her during the production. "Don't touch the girl after I call cut," he would say to me repeatedly. Critics were pleased with her performance, and Hitchcock compared her to Grace Kelly, a popular actress from his other films. Her discontent with Hitchcock's behavior slowly faded with the film's success, and after receiving a Golden Globe Award for New Star of the Year, she agreed to do another film with him. After casting her in the lead alongside Sean Connery in his psychological thriller Marnie, his aggressive advances continued, and she maintained her disinterest in Hitchcock. Tippi recalled, everyone knew he was obsessed with me. He always wanted a glass of wine or champagne, with me alone, at the end of the day. He was really isolating me from everyone. Her co-star for Marnie, Diane Baker, supported her claims, saying, "She was never allowed to gather around with the rest of us, and he demanded that every conversation between her and Hitch be held in private. Nothing could have been more horrible for me than to arrive on the movie set and to see her being treated the way she was." When Tippi asked for a break from a day intended for filming, in order to appear on The Tonight Show, where she'd be presented with an award as the most promising new star, Hitchcock replied that if he allowed her to go, he expected her to make herself sexually available and accessible to him, however, whenever, and wherever he wanted. His demands led to a huge fight, and she swore that Marnie would be the last film they made together. And he said, "I'll ruin your career." Tippi later participated in a docudrama called The Girl, a film about Hitchcock allegedly sexually harassing her and then sabotaging her career because she rejected his advances. He had locked her into a contract and never cast her again. He also refused any substantial offers on her behalf. Number 7, The Crow, released in 1994, was sort of a superhero film with a supernatural twist, starring 28-year-old Brandon Lee, the late Bruce Lee's son, who plays a young musician named Eric Draven, who is fatally shot after coming home to find gang members attacking his fiancée the night before their wedding. He is resurrected as the Crow to exact revenge for his and his fiancée's death. When actor Michael Massey shot the gun at Lee for that scene, which was meant to be holding a bullet with no charge, a lodged cartridge from the previous scene exploded from the barrel, striking Lee in the abdomen. The coincidence of his death doesn't end there. Brandon intended to marry his fiancée when filming was completed. The Crow was therefore dedicated to Lee and his fiancée Eliza Hutton. Other strange injuries and events took place during filming. One of the carpenters was shocked and burned by a scissor lift. A grip truck suddenly went up in flames. A disgruntled worker plowed through a plaster shop in his car. A stuntman fell through a roof between takes. A crew member accidentally stabbed their own hand with a screwdriver. And the list probably goes on, but those are the main ones.
Brandon's my family. So is Bruce. I have to know the truth.
The family of Brandon Lee is in mourning, and they are also angry. It's the same mix of emotions they felt 20 years ago when Bruce Lee died mysteriously at age 32. Early reports said that 28-year-old Brandon's fatal shooting on a movie set last week was an accident, but now there is even talk of murder.
If I had a child, and then for some reason I weren't around to take care of my child, I would want whatever I had accomplished with my life to be of a benefit to him.
Brandon Lee didn't have any children, but he was planning on marrying longtime girlfriend Eliza Hutton this month. That was until tragedy struck. It was here at the Carolco Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina, that actor Brandon Lee was filming The Crow. Ironically, the film is about a man who dies and comes back to life to avenge his death.
There have been so many accidents on the set of this movie.
Journalist Julianne Gary was following the strange goings-on at the Crow set for Entertainment Weekly.
A carpenter was severely burned when live wires connected with the piece of equipment he was working on. That was followed by 2 other accidents that same day. The cast and crew started referring to the curse of the Crow.
Nothing ever seemed to go right.
One crew member from the Crow set agreed to talk with us, but only if he remained anonymous.
People have tried to say it was haunted. I don't know about that. But there definitely was some bad vibes on this set.
Earlier last week, there was a sense of relief on the set of The Crow. The cast and crew had weathered all of the bizarre accidents, and there was only a week or 2 left of filming. According to the executive producer, all of the dangerous stunts were in the can. Little did they know that the curse of the Crow was about to strike with more fury than ever. Shortly after midnight last Tuesday, Brandon Lee was preparing to film a routine action scene. The script called for him to get shot at as he walked through a door carrying a bag of groceries. Michael Massey, the actor doing the shooting, is reportedly devastated by Lee's death and remains in seclusion. The gun he was using was supposed to be loaded with blanks. When the cameras rolled, Brandon Lee was performing for the last time.
And he was in, critical condition. Somehow at that point, I don't know. I mean, I've got chills right down my spine. And I felt that he's not going to make it.
Mr. Lee's heart stopped, and efforts to resuscitate him were unsuccessful.
Wednesday afternoon, Brandon Lee was pronounced dead. The autopsy revealed some shocking information.
A .44 caliber bullet was removed from Lee's body. Detectives are proceeding with the investigation.
You don't see a .44 caliber slug on a movie set, and it's just that simple.
Ed Parker Jr. is a martial arts expert, an actor who appears in a new film biography about Bruce Lee. His father trained Bruce Lee back in the 60s. He says some in the martial arts world believe that Brandon Lee was murdered.
First talking about it being a projectile, then it being a .44 caliber slug. It goes from an accident to murder.
Brandon Lee's publicist has been quoted as saying it's no longer believed to be a special effect gone wrong. He's asking for a murder probe.
Look, just let me ask you whether it's going to be criminally negligent homicide. Get out of here.
The DA on the case wouldn't talk with us, but Sergeant J.J. Leitner, the detective heading the investigation, did.
Has murder been ruled out?
Nothing's been ruled out. I have a gut feeling, but I can't tell anybody what it is.
So who would want to snuff out the life of this up-and-coming action star? That was the same question that was being asked back in 1973 when Bruce Lee died mysteriously from what the coroner listed as swelling of the brain.
The whole family believed that he's murdered, okay?
The most popular rumor about Bruce Lee's death was that he had been rubbed out by the violent Asian gang, the Triads, who people believed were linked to rivals in the movie industry.
It was, in my father's opinion, not mine, that there was definitely foul play involved as far as the Chinese syndicate was concerned.
Because the facts in the Brandon Lee killing are so sketchy, it has led to speculation that he may also have been the victim of foul play. That theory seems to play out when you consider the chilling plot of his father's final film. In Game of Death, Bruce Lee plays an actor filming a scene in which he is shot at.
Gentlemen, these are blanks.
Unbeknownst to Bruce Lee's character, among the actors shooting at Lee is an assassin with a loaded gun. It's a chilling mirror image of what many say happened to Brandon. But many of the mourners at a memorial for Brandon Lee in Los Angeles yesterday seemed to dismiss the murder plots.
Terrible, terrible accident happened on the set.
Others are still asking questions.
So something is terribly, terribly wrong here. And either, somebody's trying to murder him or there's some kind of gross negligence.
The question remains, where did the bullet come from that killed Brandon Lee? Some believe a piece of a prop bullet without gunpowder in it may have been left accidentally in the gun. When the blank was fired at Brandon, some feel it shot out the prop bullet, mortally wounding him.
The movie was an accident waiting to happen.
The Crow crew member we spoke with says that there were many opportunities for an accident to happen.
Are the working conditions on the set of The Crow particularly bad?
Extremely long hours, 18-hour days back-to-back at times, pushing 90 to 100 hours a week and 6-day weeks is was way too much.
Do you think that overwork, that exhaustion might have resulted in this accident?
Safety precautions, all of them were definitely not followed. It could have been prevented with better management.
The publicist for the movie The Crow denies that the working conditions were unsafe.
Certainly everyone was very tired and exhausted from the shoot, but these are professionals, and they're used to working in conditions like this.
No matter what caused Brandon Lee's tragic death, it's another serious blow to the Lee family.
After the loss of their lead, the producers were unsure of whether or not to continue and finish the film. Most of the filming with Lee was already captured, save for 3 days. Miramax wanted to pick up The Crow for theatrical release and invested $8 million towards the completion of the film. The script was rewritten for the missing parts, and Lee's stunt double, Chad Stahelski, was used as a stand-in, and CGI was used to superimpose Lee's face onto Chad's. A scene where Eric Draven is led between the worlds of the dead and the living was removed due to Lee's actual death. The film developed a strong cult following, which led to 3 sequels and a television series, but none of which matched the successes of the first. Number 6, Apocalypse Now, released in 1979, was an epic psychological war film based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, but the setting changed to Vietnam, although it was filmed in the Philippines. To set the overall tone, Typhoon Olga blew through on May 26, 1976, wrecking over half of their sets, and production was closed down. Parts of the crew were stranded or otherwise immobilized, staying in various hotels and small houses nearby. Director Francis Ford Coppola had already fired his leading man, Harvey Keitel, 2 weeks into filming, replacing him with Martin Sheen. He was also writing and changing the script as he went along, and they were short on crew due to various tropical diseases, and Coppola firing people left and right. Better yet, the star of the cast, Marlon Brando, arrived to the set late, unprepared and not having read his lines. He had been on a hiatus for years, since his performance in The Godfather, released in 1972, and in that time he had become extremely out of shape and overweight. Coppola spent a week getting Brando up to speed, reading him the entire script, explaining who the character was and what the movie was about, while 900 people, cast and crew, sat around and waited. Then, after all of that, Brando shaved his head and suggested he improvise his lines and scenes. He also requested he dress mostly in black, and for the most part be filmed in shadow. The Typhoon then left the film another 6 weeks behind, and $2 million over budget. Coppola received $500,000 through an insurance claim, and managed to take out a loan from the United Artists, but with conditions.
Were you in a panic when you were bankrupted 3 times? I mean, the reason that happened is you put money into your own films, and the film didn't do well financially. That's it. You were wiped out.
At a time when interest was 27%, I owed the Chase Manhattan Bank $32 million when I was in my 30s.
What possessed you to do that? Here you were, this huge, successful director. You're a guy who was so respected as a writer and a director. In fact, what was the first movie you wrote? It was like a big movie.
Patton.
Patton, one of my favorite films of all time. I didn't know you were a writer on that.
Yeah, I was the screenwriter.
So that's a terrific film. So everyone in Hollywood knows you don't put up your own money. You let a studio put up the money. What would possess you to do that?
What happened was I had made The Godfather, and then I made the one I wanted to make, The Conversation, and then ultimately Godfather 2, and I had, I had 5 Oscars and 2 first prize of the Cannes Festival, and nobody would let me make Apocalypse Now. I went around hat in hand with all these awards and this success, and that they, because even if you are even the directors who are so successful, they can't really make the movies that they have in their heart that they want to try, even if once in a while, to do something personal.
Right.
So I just was going to do it anyway, and I went off to the Philippines, and I got money from France and money from here, but I had to guarantee the budget because
you had a burning passion to make this film. You knew it would be great.
I wanted to make the film, and if you want to make something personal, you ultimately have to put up the money or try to.
At some point, the production designer purchased real human corpses for the sake of realism, and I suppose in an effort to help ensure the film was successful through its authenticity. Already seems pretty disrespectful to film cadavers for entertainment purposes. But apparently the bodies were unknowingly procured by grave robbers, and not by a medical school supplier. The Filipino police held the production crew's passports during questioning, and had soldiers come and take the bodies away. They also filmed a real water buffalo being slaughtered during a ritual performed by a local Ifugao tribe. Although subject to animal cruelty laws in the United States, these types of things were not monitored in the Philippines. The American Humane Association gave the film an unacceptable rating, It's one thing to view a barbaric tribal ritual in a natural setting, but to film it and hope for it to be part of a blockbuster hit, again viewed as entertainment. On March 5th, 1977, 36-year-old Martin Sheen suffered a near-fatal heart attack and struggled a quarter of a mile from his lodgings to reach help. He, who was deep in his struggle with drugs and alcohol during filming, was now considered a threat to the film's funding if investors were to find out about the situation. So Coppola claimed that Martin had a heat stroke instead, and Martin's brother Joe served as a stand-in. A good example is the opening scene, which was filmed on Martin's 36th birthday, and he was very heavily intoxicated. The mirror he punched and cut his hand with was not part of the scene. He was meant to just punch the air. Although Coppola thought he should stop and get medical attention, Martin continued the scene and improvised. He smeared the blood all over himself and writhed around as if in some psychotic trance. He later referred to that moment as an exorcism of his alcoholism, and the breakdown he was filmed to be having was very real. It managed to perfectly parallel the character for the scene. Later on, after the rest of the family had returned home so the kids could attend school, his drinking and drug use became more frequent and excessive, and it wasn't long before Martin suffered a near-fatal heart attack.
I really had a very close call, and I realized it's nothing that I can put into words. I just knew that if I wanted to live, it was my choice. If I wanted to die, that was my choice too. There wasn't even any fear. The fear only came when I realized later how close I came to the end. That's when I get scared.
I remember the phone ringing, and my secretary said, Marty's had a heart attack, and Francis doesn't want to admit it.
Dave Salvin let Melissa tell Barry Hirsch that Marty had a heart attack. What the fuck is that? That gossip can finish me off, because if UA hears that it's 8 weeks, UA with a $27 million negative is going to force me to complete it with what I've got. And I don't have the movie yet.
Right.
All right, now you understand exactly. Yes. If Marty dies, I want to hear that everything's okay until I say Marty is dead. You got it?
Right.
If it's not done, man, ship the whole office out of here. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, I'm really scared, guys. The first time I've been scared on this movie.
Number 5, The Exorcist, released in 1973, was a supernatural horror film following the demonic possession of a 12-year-old girl and her famous actress mother's intention to save her by having 2 Catholic priests perform an exorcism. Director William Friedkin used tactics similar to the old Hollywood style of directing in order to elicit genuine reactions. For example, both Linda Blair, who played the possessed child Reagan McNeil, and Ellen Burstyn, who played her mother Chris, were both yanked around in harnesses during fight scenes so violently, they both suffered from back injuries. Ellen suffered from a permanent spinal injury, and her screams heard in the film are very real. Friedkin also slapped one of the priests across the face, in order to conjure the solemn reaction for the last rites scene, which of course offended many of the Catholic crew members on set. He fired blanks without warning to create a shocked reaction from Jason Miller for a scene, cast as Father Damien. Miller was also told that the pea soup for the projectile vomit scene would hit him in the chest, rather than the face, which resulted in a genuine disgusted reaction. Even the medical testing Reagan receives in the movie were actual real tests, performed by actual medical staff at the New York University Medical Center, which must have been traumatizing for young Linda enough on its own, having no need to receive such tests, but only for dramatic effect in support of the plot. The voice speaking to Reagan through one of the tests was radiographer Paul Bateson. In 1979, Bateson was convicted for the murder of journalist Addison Verrill and sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. Bateson then became a suspect in a series of unsolved slayings of gay men over the course of 2 years, all meeting a similar end to Verrill. He also bragged about committing these other crimes while he was detained and awaiting trial, and he even brought it up at his sentencing. Due to the lack of evidence, no additional charges were laid against him. Although he stated he himself was not exclusively gay, his last relationship prior to these crimes and the arrest was with a man, and he frequented leather gay bars, which is where Verrill had been last seen in public alive, as well as many of the other victims. While shooting the exorcism scene, a pigeon had reportedly flown into a circuit box that started a fire in the McNeil house, which it nearly destroyed, but strangely enough, left Reagan's bedroom where the exorcism had been taking place untouched.
I do remember getting a phone call one morning at 4 a.m. from the production manager, who said, "Don't bother to come to work today." And I said, "Why? Am I fired?" And he said, "No, but the set has just burned to the ground." It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and the night watchman saw smoke coming out the door of the soundstage. And interestingly, it was while we were shooting the exorcism scene, and the place was refrigerated overnight. We had 3 large refrigeration units that would refrigerate the Peninsula Hotel. They were so powerful. And so that when we would come in the morning, the set would be about 30 below zero every morning. And Linda Blair wore that nightgown with just some long underwear that you couldn't see. The rest of us were all dressed as though we were on a ski slope. We were all in heavy winter gear, and the minute the lights went on, the temperature started to rise. But with those air conditioning units, one day the set caught fire and burned to the ground. The sets were separate. The house was a separate set from the bedroom, but they were in the same building. And the set involving the house burned, and the insurance company paid off because we had to shut down. We shut down for 6 weeks. It was that long to rebuild we had to rebuild the entire set. And the insurance company paid off on the basis that because it was an old building, there were pigeons flying around in the rafters, a pigeon flew into a light box, causing a short circuit and thus the fire. That's the only thing that happened during the entire film that I thought was some kind of bad karma. I will say one other thing I thought was strange. We made the statue of Pazuzu in Burbank, in the workshop at the Burbank Studios. It was 15 feet tall, and with the wing spread, it was about 8 feet wide. And it was put into a box and shipped by a very famous group of ex-fighter pilots that became, that started a shipping company after World War II, the Flying Tigers. And we had this statue of Pazuzu addressed to Warner Brothers, care of the Ba'athist Party in Mosul, Iraq. And somehow or other, it got to Denmark. It went to it was lost. We couldn't start shooting in Iraq for 3 or 4 weeks waiting for this statue, which went somewhere else by the Flying Tigers. And I don't know how the hell that happened. Finally, it got to us. But that is probably the only other thing I think was strange.
During the premiere in Rome, lightning struck a 400-year-old cross atop a nearby 16th century church. The film created even more troubles upon release to the public in December of 1973, reportedly causing fainting, vomiting, and heart attacks in theaters. Critics called it sickening, gruesome, and hateful, and churches effectively had it banned in the U.S., until 25 years later when it was approved by censors to be available uncut on video with an 18+ rating. If anything, this controversy helped the film become even more successful than it may have been without, earning nearly $500 million on a $12 million budget, which even now would be considered an incredible return on a film. Even so, a fair amount of death surrounded the Exorcist series, connected to it in one way or another. Linda Blair's grandfather passed away during filming, and actor Jack McGowan, who played Burke Dennings, succumbed to the flu, as well as Vasiliki Malieros, of natural causes, both very shortly after filming was complete. The son of Mercedes McCambridge, the voice of the demon, John Lawrence Feifeld, killed his own family before taking his own life after being accused of fraud in November of 1987. John had been investing his mother's money through the firm Stephen Inc. that he worked for, where he then opened a secret account in her name where the majority of the profits were being transferred. When this was discovered, John was fired from Steven Inc., and his mother refused to settle the debt through a repayment plan, and the scandal went public. Shortly after, using his own personal firearms, he ended the lives of his wife Christine, aged 45, and daughters Amy, aged 13, and Suzanne, aged 9, before taking his own life. He left a letter behind, and in summary it read, "Initially you said, well, we can work it out. But no, you refused. You called me a liar, a cheat, a criminal, and a bum. You said I have ruined your life. You were never around much when I needed you. So now I and my whole family are dead. So you can have the money. Night, Mother." McCambridge had been hospitalized due to her alcoholism numerous times, as well as for attempts to end her own life, before becoming sober in 1969. Neither of John's parents had much time for him after their divorce, and he likely had a strong, yet reasonable belief that his mother owed him. In 1986, we get a glimpse of his mother McCambridge's possibly disturbed sense of character, aside from what her alcoholism would bring, when she played the role of a mother of a child who plans to commit suicide, called Night Mother, the title being the last two words of her son's suicide note. Linda Blair says the role had a significant impact on her life and career. She was arrested for drug possession and conspiracy to sell drugs in December of 1977, 6 months after the release of The Second Exorcist, in which she reprised her role at the age of 18. She took a plea deal to reduce the charge to cocaine possession and received 3 years probation. She then went into hiding and says her experience in the Exorcist films made her choose to never have children. The second film received an extremely negative response, but nevertheless, they went on to make a third, without most of the original cast. Third film based aspects of the Gemini Killer on the real-life, still uncaptured Zodiac Killer, who in 1974 had written a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle praising the first Exorcist film as the best satirical comedy he had ever seen. Exorcist 3 then became famous for being serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer's favorite movie, and he said he'd watch the film over and over again, and before killing his victims. In fact, it was playing when the police finally arrested him on July 22, 1991. Number 4. Twilight Zone, the movie, released in 1983. A sci-fi horror anthology film based on the television series of the same name, featuring 4 separate stories, each with its own director, including Steven Spielberg, Jonathan Landis, Joe Dante, and George Miller. 4 actors participating in the first segment perished in a helicopter crash on July 23, 1982. The pilot lost control after special effects explosions were detonated, and the heat in the explosion obscured the rotor blades and detached the tail's rotor assembly. The helicopter crashed into the actors while filming, actors Vic Morrow and Edward Franz, as well as 2 child actors Micah Din Lee, age 7, and Renee Shin Yi, age 6. The 2 children were working in violation of California law, which prohibits child actors from working at night or in proximity to explosives, and requires the presence of a teacher or social worker. Landis was avoiding these laws by paying the children's parents under the table.
The scene for a movie version of Twilight Zone attempted to recreate the terror and the carnage of the hell that was Vietnam. And then, as the crew watched in horror early this morning, the make-believe dissolved, and actor Vic Morrow and 2 Vietnamese children were killed. As David Dow reports, the Twilight Zone became a nightmare.
The location was a simulated jungle in Vietnam, site of a battle scene for a movie version of the old Twilight Zone television series. But it became the scene of a real-life tragedy. A helicopter with 6 men aboard maneuvered 30 feet off the ground to film the action. Suddenly, it lost its tail rotor and crashed into actor Vic Morrow and 2 young Vietnamese children he was carrying. They were killed instantly. There's speculation that debris from explosives being used in the scene may have struck the helicopter. The 6 crewmen were treated at a nearby hospital for mostly minor injuries. For Morrow, 51, it was the end of a career that began with a tough guy role in the 1955 movie Blackboard Jungle.
Hey, don't you know his name, jerk? Excuse me, Mr. Jerk.
He was often a tough guy as he rose to fame in the 1960s television series Combat.
Yeah.
And though battle scenes and violence formed much of his acting career, they belied the real Vic Morrow, according to his co-star in Combat.
Vic hated guns. I asked him to go skeet shooting with me one day. He said he couldn't stand to kill Clay.
Morrow never became one of Hollywood's big stars, but he was widely respected as a solid character actor, and he almost finished one more role. This was to have been his last scene in Twilight Zone. David Dow, CBS News, Valencia, California.
Several people involved in the film, including the director for that segment, John Landis, were charged with manslaughter due to sheer negligence, but were acquitted after a 9-month trial lasting between 1986 and 1987.
Exploding special effects brought the low-flying helicopter down, killing all 3 actors, Vic Morrow and 2 small children, including Renee Chen. Mrs. Chen was there. Her Chinese interpreter helped her relive that night of 4 years ago.
I thought something happened to my daughter.
I'm sorry. I think it's inappropriate for me at this time to say anything.
Whose fault is it? The prosecutor, Leah D'Agostino, blames John Landis and the 4 other defendants. Her witnesses are designed to fuel her charge of reckless conduct.
Why did Vic Morrow and 2 small children go out to make a motion picture and die? Is there any motion picture worth that?
The film's production secretary, Donna Schumann, testified that Landis often ignored warnings that the scene was dangerous, but defense attorneys say she's lying.
We can't all be liars. Why would I lie?
It's been a constant war of words, with a 7-man defense team against 1 prosecutor, always accusing each other of lying. Because of that, mistrial requests have been made, but always denied. Next week, cameramen will take the stand to tell what they saw that fatal night. The trial's outcome is likely to reach way beyond the Twilight Zone into the entire movie industry.
Number 3, The Omen, released in 1976. A supernatural horror following character Damien Thorne, the baby who a father chose to replace his biological child with, who had passed away shortly after birth, in order to protect his wife from the tragic loss. Damien enters childhood and is soon believed to be some type of antichrist when mysterious events and deaths begin to occur. On June 26, 1975, a mere 2 months prior to the filming of The Omen, the lead actor who plays Damien's father, Robert Thorne, Gregory Peck, suffered the loss of his own son, who was found in his childhood bedroom with an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. Then, while flying to London in September to begin filming, Peck's plane was struck by lightning. Strangely enough, a few weeks later, executive producer Mace Newfield's plane was also struck by lightning on the way to Los Angeles. Even stranger still, shortly after that, producer Harvey Bernhard narrowly escaped being struck by lightning himself while filming in Rome. Harvey began carrying a cross on set with him and was quoted saying, "The devil was at work and he didn't want the film to be made." An animal handler that helped with the crazy baboon scene was mauled to death by a tiger shortly after shooting Wrapped. A hotel Neufeld and his wife were staying at was bombed by the IRA, as well as a restaurant some of the cast and crew had reservations at. A flight chartered by some of the film crew for aerial shots was switched at the last minute and went down after takeoff, killing everyone aboard. The strangest coincidence of all, however, that marks The Omen as a cursed movie, was when special effects artist John Richardson, who helped with the film's infamous decapitation scene, was in a car accident post-production that happened to be on a Friday the 13th. Although Richardson survived the crash, his passenger, assistant Liz Moore, was left in a similar manner to the death scene he had helped shoot. Richardson then apparently saw a Dutch road sign near the scene of the accident that read Omen, with 2 M's, 66.6 kilometers away. Number 2. Poltergeist, released in 1982. Yet another supernatural horror film, this time about a suburban family that is haunted by a malevolent force that eventually abducts their youngest daughter, and the family must rescue her from the other side. Directed by Tobe Hooper, and co-directed and written by Steven Spielberg. Spielberg and Hooper have often argued about who is most responsible for the direction and creative development behind the film. Spielberg had intended to direct this film himself, but he was under contract to direct only 1 film at a time, and he was directing E.T. at the time. I'm not sure why anyone would want to take responsibility for the birth of such a haunted film series. That's none of my business. Real skeletons were used during the swimming pool scene, where it's revealed that the Freeling home is built upon ancient burial grounds. Jo Beth Williams, who played Diane Freeling, was unaware the skeletons were real until after filming. They chose to withhold this detail because she was already hesitant about shooting in the swimming pool, given all the lights and electrical equipment surrounding the set. During filming, Oliver Robbins, who played Robbie Freeling, was meant to appear to be strangled by a clown doll. The animatronic doll began to actually strangle Oliver, and when he began screaming, "I can't breathe," Spielberg at first thought he was acting, but when his face began turning purple, he jumped up and yanked the doll away from Oliver. Dominique Dunne, who played Carol Ann's older sister Dana, was strangled by her ex-boyfriend John Thomas Sweeney in her own driveway on October 30th, 1982, also known as Devil's Night. She fell into a coma and passed away 5 days later on November 4th, 1982, only months after the first film's release, and this was her breakthrough movie role. Heather O'Rourke, who played the main character, Carol Ann Freeling, died of septic shock and an acute bowel obstruction in February of 1988 at age 12, only months before the release of the third and final film in the series. The details surrounding her death are still questionable, considering she showed no previous signs or symptoms of any stomach or bowel issues, and the great skepticism from the gastro-medical community. It was later claimed that she had been treated for Crohn's disease, requiring cortisone injections, which caused her face to swell, which is evident in the second film. Other doctors that were skeptics about the conditions of her passing also later retracted their claims, stating a congenital stenosis could cause the sudden onset of symptoms. There are even more darker theories surrounding her death, but they are a lot darker than I think we need to go into in this video. Less unexpectedly, Julian Beck, who played Reverend Henry Kane, died of stomach cancer September 14, 1985, before the release of the second film, and Will Sampson, who played the Native American shaman named Taylor, passed after a post-operative kidney failure June 3, 1987, shortly after the second film's release. Number 1. Rosemary's Baby, released in 1968. Written and directed by Roman Polanski as his first U.S.-made film, which follows a young pregnant woman in Manhattan who begins to suspect her elderly neighbors are part of an evil cult. Her husband, up-and-coming actor Guy, played by John Cassavetes, becomes close with the neighbors, where Rosemary, played by Mia Farrow, in her first leading role, considers them a meddlesome nuisance. When another leading actor mysteriously goes blind, Guy is asked to take over the role, and it appears his career is really beginning to take off. He then tells Rosemary he's ready to have a baby. On the night they are due to begin trying, the neighbors stop by under the guise of kindness with dessert, and after having some, Rosemary appears to have been drugged. She then hallucinates that she's raped by a demon, while her husband Guy, the neighbors, and other Brantford residents watch. The next morning, her husband shrugs off the scratches Rosemary finds on her body, claiming he didn't want to miss baby night, and copulated with her after she had passed out. Unconvinced with his explanation, and growing even more suspicious during her pregnancy, she starts to believe the neighbors want her baby for some kind of satanic ritual, and that her husband has conspired with them in exchange for the career boost. In one scene, Farrow is asked to wander into the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York into oncoming traffic. Polanski gestured to her pregnancy pad and assured her that no one would hit a pregnant woman. The scene, although dangerous, was successful, and shot by Polanski alone, since he was the only one willing to do it. Farrow was served with divorce papers in front of the other cast and crew by a corporate lawyer on behalf of her then-husband, Frank Sinatra. Midway through filming, Farrow begged to be released from her contract in an effort to save her relationship, but after being shown an hour-long rough cut and being assured she would receive an Academy Award nomination for her performance, she decided to complete the film. Producer William Castle received angry letters accusing him of evil and witchcraft after the film's release, including one which read, "Bastard, believer of witchcraft, worshipper at the shrine of Satanism. My prediction is you will slowly rot during a long and painful illness which you have brought upon yourself." He later suffered from kidney failure and was rushed to the hospital. The film's composer, Christoph Komeda, died of a blood clot in the brain on April 23, 1969, at the age of 37, eerily mirroring the passing of a character in the film. This came after his friend, writer Marek Lasko, jokingly pushed him off an escarpment at a party. This resulted in a hematoma that struck him 4 months later. 2 months after that, Marek suffered an accidental overdose at the age of 35, after combining alcohol and sedatives on June 14, 1969. On August 9, 1969, director Polanski's wife, actress and model Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant with their first child, and 4 of their friends' lives were ended by who were considered to be members of the infamous Manson family. Polanski was delayed in coming home from filming in London, narrowly escaping this home invasion and attack. He later allowed himself to be photographed in front of the entrance of his house, where the word pig was still visible, believed to be written in his late wife Sharon's blood. He faced a lot of backlash and criticism for the photo shoot, but he argued that he wanted to know who was responsible, and wanted to shock the readers in the hopes that someone would come forward with information. The teenagers responsible, who were staying at the Manson Ranch, had not yet been implicated for the murders. They were later revealed after Susan Atkins was arrested for Grand Theft Auto, and she bragged about not only participating in the murders, but playing in and tasting Sharon Tate's blood to her cellmates. Manson was blamed for these murders, although he was not present, and he was convicted on nothing more than circumstantial evidence, with the district attorney alleging that Manson had based his actions on the Beatles' song Helter Skelter, and that he intended to start a race war.
Do you hate certain members of the press for the way you were treated after your wife's murder?
Well, yes, to be honest, I do, but I wouldn't call it a hatred now. You see, somehow evolved to just indifference, and I simply don't read it and try to avoid it.
Yeah. I just wondered, is there any way, I don't know what you think people deserve to know or how much business people have knowing about a thing like it's called the Sharon Tate case, although there were a lot of other victims. Is there anything good that has been written about it? I know this sounds silly, but I mean, is there a book or is there anything that you would recommend for people who wanted?
Well, I just don't read. I'm sorry. I don't read for my own good.
Yeah.
And it's possible. It would be silly of me to say that absolutely everything written by the press is obnoxious. And this is impossible.
The press is too broad.
I mean, I'm philosophically oriented this way that I know that there are always mutants, you know? Mm-hmm. The principle of life and evolution, so there must be some flukes. But in general, I despise the press tremendously for its inaccuracy, for its irresponsibility, for its often even deliberate cruelty, and all this, it's for lucrative purposes.
It's almost impossible to run into anyone in the movie community who doesn't claim to have some inside knowledge of the event. You know what I mean?
No.
Anytime the subject comes up out there, people claim to have, they know something that never came out in the papers, and it's never the same thing. It's always something else.
Oh, yeah, well...
There's the way people descend on an event like that is sort of strange.
Well, this is part of human nature. I mean, I was accused of being one of the accomplices, you know.
Yeah.
By even people who I thought were well willing to. But it was like a great psychological test, like great psychoanalysis. I could see that everybody saw it from his angle, you know, his point of view, and was looking for the culprits in the area which would be somehow related to the way he was thinking. You know what I mean? I don't want to be more specific about it.
Okay. Yeah. I think I do. Did it seem at the time you might never work again? Did it just seem that you could never go into public again?
Yeah, it lasted for a very long time. It lasted for a good 8 months, I would think. And then when I started working again, I didn't want to do anything like this show, for example, or any interviews. Somehow, under the pressure of the people who gave the money for the film and took a great risk because it cost several $1 million, $3 million. Let's be specific. For their sake, I thought I have to do it, and I'm doing these things. But I would rather feel better if I did not have to talk and to be part of the public life.
On March 10th, 1977, the then 43-year-old Polanski was arrested and charged with 6 different offenses against 13-year-old Samantha Geimer, including rape by use of drugs, sodomy, lewd and lascivious act upon a child under 14, and furnishing a controlled substance to a minor. He pled not guilty, but later tried to enter a plea bargain, which would dismiss 5 of the initial charges, in exchange for a guilty plea to the lesser charge of engaging in unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor. When he learned that he was likely to face imprisonment either way, he became a fugitive, fleeing to London and then France, and tried to avoid anywhere that he may be extradited back to the U.S.
Newspapers and the magazines and the books talk about you and little girls. Is there anything in it?
Well, I like young women, let's put it this way. And I think most of men do, actually.
Yeah, but the question turns on how young, doesn't it?
Well, yes, because I like the girls of this age, and because the girls of that age, for some reason, like me. And just it went a little bit too far. One of those on the session with this girl. And it happened one afternoon when I was, after I photographed her.
Yeah, when he wanted to get into jacuzzi, I knew I was in trouble. Like, wait, this is not what he's supposed to be doing. And I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew whatever was on his mind was not a good thing.
It was the moment Samantha Geimer's life changed forever. Were you frightened at that point?
That's the moment. Then I realized something was wrong. I was frightened. I didn't know what to do. And I just knew then, it was like, oh, this guy, like, he wants to get his hands on me. Oh my God, what am I going to do? You know, Roman's fame at that time, he was very powerful, very well known. I think when you're wealthy or powerful or well known, people don't say no to you. And you have like this different view of life where you're accustomed to getting what you want because you get what you want.
How would you describe yourself as a 13-year-old?
I thought I was grown up and mature and an adult, but, you know, I was just a little bit more of a naive kid than I would have liked to think about myself.
And you were interested in a career in the movies or as a model, the entertainment business.
Right, I wanted to be an actress, not really a model, but, you know, I wanted to be an actress or a singer or, you know, I wanted to go into the business.
On December 8th, 1980, Beatles member John Lennon was assassinated by Mark David Chapman in front of the building featured in the film, which was referred to as the Brantford. Polanski has yet to face the consequences of his crimes. In fact, he was nominated for the French equivalent of an Oscar in 2020, where he won Best Director for his 2019 film, An Officer and a Spy.
Le César de la meilleure réalisation est attribué à
Roman Polanski pour J'accuse.
A controversial win for the Franco-Polish filmmaker and his movie about one of France's most controversial episodes of the 19th century.
Many of the other attendees walked out in protest.
Few awards provoke this sort of reaction.
But it really makes you wonder about the priorities in Hollywood.
And the protest outside before and during the ceremony left little doubt as to why.
Mais une cérémonie agitée, perturbée dès l'entrée, regardée avec quelques dizaines de manifestants devant la salle Pleyel à Paris, manifestant contre les 12 nominations du film J'accuse de Roman Polanski. Polanski, sacré meilleur réalisateur hier soir, et à l'annonce du prix, l'actrice Adèle Haenel quitte la salle. Récit de cette soirée avec Camila Campuzano et David Verac.
Thanks for watching. I'll probably drop a couple more of these Blast from the Past reboots while I continue to dig deeper for JonBenet Part 2. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the flip side.